All too often we're met with weak leaders all over the Western world, and one topic generally has them so scared, many won't utter the words Islam or the more politically correct radical Islam, even if it follows the deaths of your own citizens in Islamic terror attacks. If prompted, this is what happens to them.
Do you feel like there needs to be, and should there be, a greater emphasis on hate speech from Muslim clerics in the western part of Sydney?
I think, as I said earlier, what we've done is criminalise more forms of hate speech, and we criminalise the Nazi salute. Obviously, that's in its own context. But we need to be looking at all of this, and it is really important that we have.
So should there be a greater emphasis on this hate speech from Muslim clerics then?
And in other cases, we have the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Keir Starmer, inviting people over for an iftar and then going on to assure attendees that he absolutely did not provide any assistance to his ally in America, who is currently striking Iran.
But on Iran, I want to make clear the UK was not involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel. And that remains the case.
Let's be blunt, these are pathetic men. Men who know a huge problem exists, yet are too scared to do anything about it because guess what? They now rely on the votes of a civilizational opponent to stay in power. And worse, it seems dual alliances in New Citizens and, well, even second-generation Muslims in the UK are now holding foreign policies and even 100-year-old alliances hostage to sectarian goals. But one individual has gone against the grain. It's not often that we see a United States Secretary of War being this blunt. Pete Hegseth's actually repeated an idea that's actually been around for over a decade now. Let's roll the tape.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. Their war on Americans has become our retribution against their Ayatollah and his death cult. It took the 47th president, a fighter who always puts America first, to finally draw the line after 47 years of Iranian belligerence. He reminded the world, as he has time and time again, being an American means something unbreakable. If you kill Americans, if you threaten Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you. President Trump has also been very consistent. Crazy regimes like Iran, hell-bent on prophetic Islamist delusions, cannot have nuclear weapons. It's common sense. Many have said it, but it takes guts to actually enforce it, and our president has guts.
I don't think people realize the significance of what he's just said, because on the surface it sounds like another tough statement about Iran. Politicians say aggressive things all the time, especially when tensions are high and you're striking that country. But what Hegseth said is actually referencing a very specific strategic argument that has been building for years inside military and intelligence circles. And that argument is this: the entire nuclear deterrence system that has kept the world relatively stable since World War II may not work against certain ideological regimes. To understand why that matters, we need to step back for a moment and look at the system that prevented nuclear war for nearly 80 years. After the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the world entered a completely new era of warfare. Within a few years, the Soviet Union had developed its own nuclear weapons, and the two superpowers quickly began building massive arsenals. By the 1960s, both sides possessed thousands of nuclear warheads mounted on intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and long-range bombers. The destructive power involved here is difficult to comprehend. A single modern nuclear warhead can destroy an entire city. The United States and the Soviet Union had enough of them to destroy each other many times over. Some estimates during the Cold War suggested that the total combined arsenals could kill hundreds of millions of people within hours. At first glance, that sounds like the most dangerous situation imaginable. Two rival superpowers with the ability to end civilization. But strangely enough, those weapons ended up creating a kind of stability. This stability was built on a doctrine known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The logic behind it was brutally simple. If one side launched a nuclear attack, the other side would retaliate with its own nuclear weapons. That retaliation would be devastating enough to guarantee the destruction of the attacker as well. To put it more bluntly, there was no winning a nuclear war. If the United States launched first, the Soviet Union would respond and both societies would be destroyed. If the Soviets launched first, the United States would retaliate and the same outcome would occur. Everyone dies. Once both sides understood that reality, nuclear weapons became paradoxical. They were the most powerful weapons ever created, but using them would guarantee your own destruction. And because both sides understood this, neither side actually wanted to push that button. This is why the Cold War, despite being incredibly tense, never escalated into a nuclear conflict. Instead, we saw proxy wars in places like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. We saw espionage, ideological competition, and geopolitical maneuvering. But direct nuclear war between the superpowers never happened. Side note, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and hit subscribe. This channel is entirely fan supported, so if you want to support the work and the mission behind it, consider joining Patreon. That's what keeps the channel alive and gives you early access, longer and uncensored videos, written articles, and member-only chats. You have to remember, even during moments of extreme tension, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the leaders on both sides ultimately stepped back. President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev understood that if things escalated too far, the result would be mutual annihilation, and neither of them wanted that. The entire Cold War nuclear order therefore rested on deterrence. Each side was deterred from launching nuclear weapons because doing so would guarantee its own destruction. Now, here's the crucial part. This entire system only works under one very specific assumption. The people controlling those nuclear weapons must value survival. They must want their country to survive. They must want their population to survive. And most importantly, they must want to stay alive themselves. During the Cold War, that assumption held true. The Soviet leadership might have been America's greatest rival, but they were still rational actors in the most basic sense. They did not want the Soviet Union wiped off the map. They did not want Moscow turned into a radioactive crater. Their ideology might have been different from the West, but they still prioritized survival in this world. But once you recognize that assumption, a much more uncomfortable question begins to emerge. What happens if that assumption doesn't apply? What happens if the leadership of a regime genuinely believes that dying in a religious struggle is not a defeat, but a victory? If the fear of death disappears, the entire logic of nuclear deterrence begins to collapse. And this is where the problem begins. Over the past 20 years, a number of thinkers have pointed out that deterrence only works if the people on the other side are playing the same game. Pete Hegseth isn't the first one to have said this, although he's probably the most prominent more recently. One of the most well-known voices arguing this is philosopher Sam Harris. His argument is actually very simple. Mutually assured destruction works because both sides believe death is the worst possible outcome. The threat of annihilation keeps everyone cautious. But things change dramatically once Islam enters that equation. Once you introduce that, where death in battle is not the worst outcome, where martyrdom is rewarded, where eternal paradise and 72 virgins are promised to those who die in the service of a divine cause, suddenly the psychology behind deterrence begins to look very shaky. Harris's point was not that religious people are irrational across the board. I mean, I've always argued Islam is very unique in what it actually believes, and I agree with him here. His argument was that a leader who genuinely believes that death leads to eternal reward may calculate risks very differently from a purely secular leader. If the afterlife is considered more valuable than life on Earth, then the threat of earthly destruction loses some of its power. In the Cold War, Soviet leaders feared nuclear war because it meant the destruction of their country and their people. But once a worldview enters the picture where death can be interpreted as a spiritual victory, deterrence begins to lose the psychological leverage it relies on. As some analysts have put it, the metaphysics of martyrdom can transform annihilation from the worst possible outcome into something that can be framed as triumph. Think about how scary that is. Now, luckily, nuclear war isn't immediately on the horizon, but something else very much is. Across the Western world, free speech online is increasingly on the chopping board. Governments are regulating platforms and passing speech laws to control what you can say online. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think you should too. They're based in Switzerland, outside the reach of US, EU, UK, and Australian law. They don't keep logs and are built by the same team behind Proton Mail. When the UK passed its surveillance laws, Proton VPN became the #1 app on the App Store. Their stealth protocol beats censorship firewalls. Secure Core routes your traffic through privacy-first countries, and NetShield blocks trackers before they ever reach you. I've used Proton Mail since Australia announced sweeping surveillance laws last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's now essential. If you want to protect your privacy and support this channel, hit the link below to get up to 60% off Proton VPN. Now, whether one agrees with that argument or not, it has had huge influence on how certain policymakers view regimes like Iran. The Iranian regime isn't just another authoritarian government pursuing national interests in the traditional sense. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the regime in Tehran has defined itself through a revolutionary religious ideology. Its leadership frequently frames its mission in terms of religious destiny, martyrdom, and the global expansion of Islamic governance. Analysts studying Iran's political theology have even pointed to the regime's connection to 12 Shia eschatology, which includes beliefs about the return of the Mahdi following a period of global chaos. That naturally changes the way risk is calculated. And beyond ideology, Iran has spent decades building a strategy designed to operate right below the threshold of direct war. Instead of confronting its enemies head-on, the regime developed an extensive network of proxy groups across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza have all received varying levels of support from Tehran. These groups allow Iran to attack adversaries indirectly while maintaining plausible deniability. And add to that their drone and ballistic missile programs. This strategy is sometimes described as exploiting the stability-instability paradox. Nuclear ambitions create strategic stability at the top level because no one wants to trigger a full-scale war. But underneath that nuclear umbrella, lower-level conflicts and proxy warfare become more common. Iran could fund militias, support insurgencies, and threaten shipping routes while the world hesitated to escalate the situation further. And this is exactly the nightmare scenario that many Western strategists have been worried about. A regime that already runs an international network of armed proxies eventually gaining nuclear weapons. Now zoom out for a moment, and this problem isn't limited to Iran. There are already examples that make analysts deeply uncomfortable. Pakistan, for instance, became a nuclear power through a program that relied heavily on stolen Western technology and an international proliferation network run by the infamous scientist A.Q. Khan. That network later helped transfer nuclear technology to other regimes, including North Korea and Libya. Of course, many argue, and I'll be honest, I have too, that the UK may become a problematic country if it continues being held hostage by a strong, sectarian Islamic bloc. That would mean that nuclear weapons could get compromised or worse, fall into the hands of British Islam that is oddly even more extreme than some Muslim-majority countries. Now zoom out even further and the real issue begins to emerge. For decades, Western leaders convinced themselves that nuclear proliferation could be managed. Sanctions here, negotiations there, another diplomatic agreement every few years. The idea was always the same. Kick the problem down the road and hope the system holds together. Today, the environment is very different. Nuclear technology is no longer confined to two superpowers staring each other down the Iron Curtain. It now exists in regions defined by proxy warfare, religious movements, unstable governments, and ideological conflicts that stretch across entire continents. You probably know many of their names now, as these groups and even countries have been in the news cycle a lot the past few years. The players may be different now, so may the incentives, and more importantly, the assumptions that once kept the system stable are starting to look dangerously outdated. But there is another uncomfortable truth. Most Western politicians don't want to have this conversation. Do you really think Keir Starmer or Mark Carney or even Anthony Albanese are capable of thinking about this? Of course not. For them, it's far easier to host symbolic events and issue carefully worded statements than it is to confront the ideological forces shaping modern geopolitics. It's easier to pretend every religion and political system ultimately wants the same things. Reality, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. And the reason Hegseth's statement caught so many people off guard is because, for once, someone in power said the quiet part out loud. Not every regime can be managed, not every ideology can be deterred, and pretending otherwise might be the most dangerous illusion of all.
In the neon haze of a broken dawn, steel towers hum, but the wild runs on.